Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 7th of February 2023. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics here. Great to have you on. Thanks for taking some time out on your Tuesday. And we're going to have an interesting conversation this evening, specifically about household stress, property scenarios, the RBA, and all the things that have gone on today. Quite a lot of developments, of course. And we'll get into some of that. Just before I do that, I will remind you that we do ask you to remember this is not financial advice. This is just a general conversation. So if you need specific financial advice or legal advice or property advice, talk to a professional. Just a general conversation tonight. Also, the moderation of the chat room is in progress. So just bear that in mind. But I do encourage you to share your thoughts and opinions. The more the merrier. And also, this is as at the 7th of February, if you're watching in replay. If you'd like to get my attention or ask a question, if you say @WalkTheWorld to start it, that'll go into my queue. Much greater chance of being able to see it and to answer it. And I've also enabled Super Chat, which means that you can get your question top of the list if you want to do that, or indeed, if you'd like to make a contribution to what we do here, greatly appreciated. We do this because we think it's an important conversation, not because we're trying to make profit out of it specifically. So any contribution is greatly received and goes into helping us to make better programs. Now let's move directly on to talk about the Reserve Bank decision, because of course they made their decision today and it was pretty much as expected. But in the nuance, in the comments, pretty interesting stuff actually. So they started by saying 25 basis points to 3.35% and increased, of course, the exchange settlement balances by 25 basis points. In other words, the money that the banks have got parked at the Reserve Bank are now getting paid even more. And, of course, a lot of that money is the term funding facility that the RBA gave to those banks at 0.1 or 0.25%. So they're making a nice 3% plus turn on money at the central bank. Nice if you can get it. And they went on to talk about the fact that global inflation remains very high. Moderating in response to lower energy prices, resolution of supply chain problems, tightening monetary policy. Some time, though, before inflation gets back to target rates. Of course, they don't really explain that the inflation was created not just by supply chain disruptions and those things, but it was also created by their massive loose policy, taking interest rates way too low, doing things like the turning funding facility and all of the other liquidity, quantitative easing, all those things. They created the problem. And yet, of course, they don't want to recognise that they were part of the problem rather than part of the solution. I'm afraid that central banks around the world still aren't really owning up to their part in creating the problem in the first place, much to their shame. But why would they, I suppose? But you've also got to bear that in mind when you hear about what they're saying in terms of how they're going to tackle it going forward. They also said that the inflation was 7.8, the underlying inflation 6.9, that's higher than, of course, they expected. And global factors explain much of this high inflation. But then they said, and some domestic demand is adding to the inflationary pressures. Yes, RBA, you created some of this yourself. Inflation, they say, is expected to decline this year, thanks to global factors and slower growth. The central forecast for CPI is to decline to 4.75% this year and around 3% by mid-2025. So just let me be clear, around 3% by the middle of 2025. So we're not going to get back to the target band for another 2 years. And then they go on to say that medium-term inflation expectations do remain well anchored. Yeah, well, we'll see. Now, they said the economy grew in 2022. Central forecast has little changed, around 1.5%. Labour market remains very tight. Unemployment rate at around 3.5%. And many firms continue to experience difficulty hiring workers. Unemployment is expected to increase. And the central forecast for unemployment is to 3.75% by the end of this year and 4.5% by mid-2025. So it's worth just underscoring there that they think that there are going to be more people out of work than currently. That is a significant factor when you think about how the economics are going to play out ahead. And they also said that wages growth continues to pick up and further pickups are expected, but they also are paying close attention. They don't want wages growth too fast and too hard. They don't want it embedded. So compared with a couple of years ago when the RBA was saying, actually, it's good to have wages growth. Now they're saying we don't want too much wages growth. So they changed their tune there. And then they said there's a lag between policy and seeing the effects. That's probably true. 18 months to 2 years typically. Certainly 3 months for the mortgage payments to come through. And they are going to say that some households have substantial savings buffers. This is a change in story now. Some households have substantial buffers. Others are experiencing a painful squeeze on their budgets due to higher rates and the increase in the cost of living. Finally, they begin to recognise it. Households' balance sheets are being affected by declines in house prices. And, of course, there's also the question of the global responses too. They still are targeting 2 to 3%, but they say the path to achieving a soft landing remains a narrow one. And they concluded that further increases in interest rates will be needed over the months ahead to ensure that inflation returns to target. And this period of high inflation is only temporary, defined temporary, certainly 2 to 3 years. And in assessing how much further interest rates need to increase, the board will pay close attention to developments in the global economy, trends in housing spending and outlook for inflation in the labour markets, and they remain resolute. So there you go. That's the latest from the RBA. No great surprise. Some people were suggesting they were going to lift more. CBA was suggesting maybe 40 basis points and then hold. But now, of course, the greatest view, I think the most sensible view, is to say they are going to lift again. They're still right behind the 8 ball, of course. They're still leaving interest rates lower than in many other Western countries. The Fed lifted, of course, the Bank of England lifted. And so you've got to ask the question, when are we going to catch up? Because we need to catch up. We need to get to the point where the inflation rate is actually below the current cash rate, the sort of the long-term inflation rate, the trimmed inflation rate. And in the US, that's pretty much where they've got to now. So it's important to understand that. Our problem is that the inflation rate is still rising and the trimmed mean at 6.9 is extremely high. So that's a real issue. So whether you think the RBA's got it right or not, my own view is I think that they are really up against it, and I don't think they've necessarily got policies appropriate to where we currently are, which is going to put a lot of pressure on households as well as businesses. And in fact, the big boss over at ANZ, Shane Elliott, said there are probably going to be more rate rises than people think. I think he's probably right. And in fact, Steve Mickenbecker the other day said in his article that historic data suggests the cash rate of 3.1 has room to increase further, and they're talking about a cash rate of 4.6%. And by the way, ANZ was the first to lift the rates after the announcement, lifting the rate by 25 basis points, and they're also going to lift balances for savings, especially on those with lower balances. So it's quite interesting. We're seeing term deposit rates of 4%. And just to reiterate what I said, there will probably are going to be more rate rises than people think, said the bank boss at ANZ. So, it's pretty clear which way things are going to go. So the idea that we're actually at the end of the rate rises is shockingly wrong, I think. Now, the other interesting observation, this happened today, was that Eubanks now announced a 35-year home loan term for refinancing. This is a new development. They've had a 35-year home loan for new loans for some time, but this is for refinancing. And Canstar did some analysis and basically said, well, you can perhaps save a little bit if you go to 35 years, essentially looking at the typical mortgage repayment on a typical loan. You'd go from the lowest variable rate of 2.636, or if you don't refinance 3.215, or if you go to 2.441. So there's a small increase. But look at this, the amount you pay over the life of the loan jumps dramatically. And of course, the other point here is that means you're going to hold your mortgage into old age. And one of the biggest problems we have at the moment is the fact that we've got households moving into retirement with big mortgages. So this is yet another trend. And you may remember I said a few months ago, I expect to see three things. Firstly, I expected to see migration increase. Well, we're at 300,000 now and counting. I expected to see more stimulus programs. So we've got more shared equity schemes, for example, as well as state schemes. And I suggested that loan durations were going to be extended. 35 years is the Eubank one. I wouldn't be surprised to see 40 years coming in too, because of course what that means is that banks can harvest more interest over that period of time. You end up paying a lot more, but it means that the monthly repayment is just slightly lower. And for some people, that could make all the difference. And by the way, in some cases, you also get paid a cash payment up front, a few $1,000s, to refinance. One of the reasons why refinancing has been pretty high in recent times. Now, let's just have a quick look at some other information. So the consumer confidence metric from Roy Morgan, ANZ, came out today. It's lower again. And they actually said that the biggest fall experienced since early August 2022. Confidence about current and future finances fell sharply. Household inflation expectations drifted, but are still lower than expectations during the final 3 months of 2022. And confidence amongst homeowners paying off their mortgages fell less than other status cohorts, although still ended the week with lower confidence than renters and outright homeowners. So you can see that this is biting real people with mortgages now. And they also made the point that the time to buy a major household item fell 2.9 points. So it's all pretty gloomy when it comes to household sentiment. Also, the retail numbers that came out from the ABS showed that, in fact, the quarterly retail numbers were down, just down a little bit into negative territory. So that's another problem. And whilst activity on cards, according to Westpac, is there, retail has slowed considerably. And they're saying that whilst there is some underlying momentum, retail segments have seen a significant slowing. And of course, we're going to see more of that, I think, as households find it's harder and harder to maintain their household living style based on higher interest rates and, of course, higher cost of living. Now, it's interesting that the data here shows that the rents are rising significantly. This is from one of the data sources that we get quite often. And you can see here that the year-on-year changes on rents, houses versus units, are pretty remarkable. So in Brisbane, units up 11%, houses up 14%. In regional WA, 14.3%. In some other places, a little lower. So there is still an issue as well with the rental sector as well. And just on that, it's worth highlighting again the growth in migrants. These are temporary visa holders. Significant growth, both in annual growth and in terms of the number as well as the percentage. And interestingly, just to add a little more sort of spice to the argument, New South Wales Labor has just come up and said they'd rip up existing plans for housing development at metro stations and redo them with significant higher density. So we're going to see in New South Wales, if Labor gets in, we're actually looking to increase density. In other words, let's build more higher. Well, that's going to, of course, meet the needs of the property developers, but not necessarily the lifestyle. So wherever you look, I would argue that there's a lot of pain, a lot of pressure, a lot of difficulty bubbling along at the moment. And before I go into my mortgage stress and then look at the comments in more detail, I just want to show you this slide because I think this is probably a very important slide. It basically makes the point that if you look at the way that inflation and interest rates have tracked, in fact, as inflation rises, and this is from 1960 to 2021, actually as interest rates rise, inflation rises. As inflation rises, interest rate rise. So there's a really fundamental question here is, so precisely how do higher interest rates actually tamp out inflation? And actually, the more you think about it, the more you think, well, actually, maybe higher interest rates equals higher inflation. And that's one of the factors that I think is in the mix here at the moment. I'm not sure that necessarily the strategy that the central banks are thinking about is the full story. We'll talk about this perhaps more in another show, but I think it's quite an interesting point to look at. Okay, so I want to go on to look at core market model. Before I do that, let me just have a quick look over here in the chat and just see whether there's anything that I want to pick up. Just have a quick look. Cookie Boy said, CPI 7.8%, interest rate 3.35, way behind the 8 ball. Absolutely right. And comment from New Zealand that New Zealand's going crazy with interest rates at the moment. Yeah, absolutely right. And Drew says, can we get RBA genius to resign? Probably not, because, of course, he's quite protected. Though, did you notice how the Jim Chalmers basically separated the RBA from the government policy? It's nothing to do with us. It's their policy today in his comments. So he's getting a bit desperate now. And, in fact, the Greens are trying to persuade the RBA via the government to reverse the decision, which is interesting. So we'll see. And Mark Smith said, Dr. Lowe the arsonist is now trying to be Dr. Lowe the fireman. That's about right. They created the problem, and they're now trying to put it out. And, of course, the question is, what's the likelihood of them being successful? Interesting comment here as well, which I might just address, and that is that over a 35-year period, you might be crazy, but not to have paid off a significant proportion of your mortgage and got some equity. I agree, except that the data shows that currently there are more people going into old age and going into reduced income with bigger than ever mortgages. So the proportion of people who actually own their properties outright when they move into retirement is as low as it's ever been. So that's actually what's happening in practice. Now, I think you're right. People should be paying their mortgage off quickly, paying it down, getting rid of it, because the sooner you get rid of it, the more you can actually then build wealth elsewhere. But at the moment, that's not really going to happen, unfortunately, for many people. So that's a very good point that you make, but I don't think it's very likely that we're going to see a lot of people. And New Zealand property forecast, thank you. Well, I'll come back and talk about New Zealand another time when we get some more information. Watch this space. Okay. And James said, why get a loan? Because life's expensive. Well, actually, you get a loan because what you're doing is you're pulling forward your future income to be able to get something today. That's a marketing idea. That's instant gratification. Now, sometimes it's appropriate, so probably to get a mortgage to help you buy, because that's a big transaction. But unfortunately, many people end up with lots of debts. And what I'm seeing in my surveys is a lot of people with mortgage stress are actually accumulating other debts too. That is one of the other issues that I'm seeing. A lot of people don't get that, in fact, it isn't just the mortgage you've got to think about. You've got to think about credit cards, buy now, pay later, other personal loans, car leases, the whole kit caboodle. And unfortunately, many people are digging themselves a pretty nasty hole. Okay, I think I've caught up on the chat. So let me just come back to my presentation. So those of you who followed me will know that I look at data from my models. The input of that is the household surveys, and what we're doing there is surveying 1,000 a week, 52,000 a year into our core market model, statistically randomised across the country, phone-based surveys, and the data comes in each week. And then we can slice and dice the data all sorts of different ways, and we can also put them through our core market model and scenarios. I'll talk about the scenarios a bit later, and come up with what might happen. So we can look at stress, the trajectory of prices, buying and selling intentions, migration, the CPI stuff and other economics, into the core market model, into the scenarios, and then we can look at a postcode level, region, state, or Australia, and that then gives us the ability to be able to think about where things might be going. Now, scenarios, of course, are not predictions. They're just showing you sensitivities. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some of the main inputs. But before I do that, I just want to highlight that we do actually also provide our one-to-one service. So this is very popular at the moment. So if you want an individual conversation, confidential conversation with me about a particular suburb, I can't give financial advice specifically, but I can talk about my data and the postcode trends and those sorts of things. I can look at stress, home price, trend data, and also look at the forward views. And you can book a time, Zoom, either phone or Zoom, up to an hour. There is a charge involved because there's a lot of research that's required, payable in advance, and there's a 3 to 5 week waiting list. But if you are interested, you can go to my blog, find details there, or send me a message again from the blog, and I can happily share with you some specific information. But anyway, generally, we're going to look at some of that information tonight. And just to start with, definition of stress. Now, there are many different definitions of stress, from 30% of income or taxable income through to underwriting metrics, but we define stress in cash flow terms, money in, money out. And that's because I need to look at not just the mortgage payment or the rental payment, but all of the flows in and out, income, expenditures. And if households have more outgoings, I'm excluding one-off discretionary items than income, then we would find them stressed. If they have a mortgage, they're in mortgage stress. If they're renting, then they have rental stress. We can also look at investors with cash flow pressure, and we can identify them as stressed investors, and we can aggregate the data to estimate total financial stress, and we can do that at a postcode level as well. And we can report it as a percentage of households and a count. Now, the percentage of households might be fine, except you will have some postcodes with small numbers of households, so you might have high percentage counts. The latter is actually better, so the count, I think, gives a better view, and that's what I tend to use. So let's now look at the mortgage stress data. This is as at the end of January 2023. And at the end of January, the first thing to say is that rental stress shot up. We now have 61.79% of rental people in rental stress. So they're struggling with cash flow when they're paying their rents. And if you go back to the year 2000, it was well below 10%, and now it's shot up. And you can see this acceleration recently. This is the effect post-COVID in particular. And if we look at the mortgage stress number, that's now sitting at 46.1% of households. If you go back pre-COVID, it was 32.9%, and you can see how it grew there. It was rising, fell back when rates were started to cut. Then the average loan size started to grow. Then it grew a lot more because rates were cut, and now we're at 46.1%. And by the way, the household debt-to-income ratio is still 189, very high. So that's reported by the RBA. So we have highly indebted household. Now here is the summary for January. And what I've done here is to highlight in yellow where the stress has gone up compared with last month. So you can see that every state is reporting higher levels of mortgage stress, money in, money out. For rental stress, we are seeing ACT, New South Wales, Tasmania and Victoria, and the grand total rising. There was a fall in the Northern Territories, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia, though the falls were quite small. Stressed investors were higher in the ACT, New South Wales and the NT, Tasmania. And financial stress, well, it went up nationally, and apart from WA and South Australia, where it went down slightly, that's predominantly because of refinancing and also because of rental changes here and here. But you can see that financial stress is a problem. So 43.96%. And just to look at those numbers, so we've got 1.76 million households in mortgage stress out of the 9.7 million households. We've got 1.9 million households in rental stress. We've got 606,000 stressed investors. And overall financial stress, that's all the aggregate views, is 4.2 million out of 9.7 million, 43%. So things are looking pretty precarious. And then if we look at it by segment, now this is looking at it from our specific segment analysis. And you can see here that, again, I've highlighted in yellow where the highest counts are in percentage terms. So this isn't necessarily up or down from last month, but 76% of battling urban, so they're on the outer fringes, disadvantaged fringe. And young growing families is where the most significant problems are in percentage terms. In rental stress, we've got the multicultural establishment. So those are the first generation Australians. They are being bolstered by more migrants coming into the country, as well as wealthy seniors and young affluents. And exclusive professionals not far behind. Quite a lot of those, of course, have multiple investment properties. Then we have some interesting observations here, because you can see here that those investment properties are not necessarily performing that well. Young affluents, exclusive professionals, both registering. And overall financial stress, 54% for battling urban, 51% for young affluent, 63% for young growing families. And it's worth underscoring, a lot of first-time buyers are in the young affluent and young growing family categories. So, if we then look quickly at the mortgage stress, I've sorted it here by the count of households. As I've said before, the count is the best way to look at it. So nationally, Campbelltown 2560 leads the way. Then we've got Liverpool, so another postcode in Western Sydney. Then we go down to Victoria, to Roxburgh Park. Then we go to regional Australia in Toowoomba in Queensland. And then we go across to Western Australia, Tapping and places like that. Then we go to Samson in Western Australia. Then we go to Camden in New South Wales, Narrawarren in Victoria, Berwick and Harkaway in Victoria, Riverstone in New South Wales, Ballarat, another regional centre in Victoria, Pakenham in Victoria, and then we go to Queensland, including Pine Mountain and a few other suburbs there, and Merriwa and Sydenham in Victoria. And anybody who watched Channel 9 tonight will see that they actually covered my research, including Sydenham. And if we look at rental stress, again, the one with the highest count is in the centre of Melbourne, postcode 3000. But then we go to Liverpool, Toowoomba, Campbelltown, Hoppers Crossing in Victoria, Southport and Labrador in Queensland, and then around Burnett Heads and places like that, and Millbank in Queensland, Coomera, Waterloo and Zetland in New South Wales, Mount Druitt, Wentworthville, Gosford, mid-north coast, Craigieburn, Donnybrook, and then Ipswich and Blacktown. And finally, you can see there the stressed investors. And what's interesting is that Narrabeen, Greystanes, and then Melbourne, St Kilda, Hornsby, Surrey Hills, Cranbourne, Millbank, South Bank. Quite a lot of these are actually high-rise units. Units are doing really badly still, despite the fact there's been some growth in rents. And you can see that places like Wollongong are also being impacted too, Cogra. And if we then finally look at financial stress, you can see there that the most stressed postcode across the country at the moment is Liverpool, 2170, 69.2%, then Campbelltown, then Toowoomba, then Roxburgh Park, then the centre of Melbourne, then Hoppers Crossing, then Mount Druitt, Wentworthville, Cranbourne, Derrimont, Ipswich, Springfield, Ballarat, Blacktown, Camden, Millbank, and Tapping. So there you go. You can see how that all plays out. Now, the other way, of course, we can look at that is to look at our stress mapping. And those of you who have followed the show before will know that the stress mapping shows you in visual format. Just need to put this up in a better... Let's do that. Let's go there and go there. There you go. So this is looking at New South Wales, and we have the counts, of course, from 275 and below, the blue, and 8,000 and above in the red. And you can see here that Western Sydney, so all the way from the Hills Shire at the top there, and then down through 2170, down to places like Campbelltown is where the counts are highest. Blacktown, of course, is there too, Liverpool. We also have some other places further in, and if you drill into some of the closer suburbs, which I'll do in a second, you can see that there will be some there. But I just want to highlight again, these bands around Western Sydney is where a lot of the issues are. So if we then drill in just a bit further, it is worth highlighting that even closer in to the centre of Sydney, we also do have some areas where, in fact, there are, not massive counts, but even in Mossman, for example, there are higher counts. Lane Cove, Ryde, Bondi, Randwick, Waterloo, down Botany Way, and even down to Roselands, places like that, and Canterbury and Bankstown. So there are quite a few areas where you've also got some significant issues. Now, we can pretty much look anywhere we want across the country, so I will go to 6,000 just to pick that one out. So this is, of course, Western Australia. And once again, it's worth highlighting that different postcodes have different characteristics, different strengths and weaknesses, and different counts. So when you start pulling out from the centre of Perth, you start to see stuff towards the coast and south and north of Perth, where there are higher counts. Wanneroo's one area, south of Fremantle is another area. And as you pull out, you can see that some of the suburbs close to the coast, a lot of high development, a high density development is where we have a lot of issues. And as we pull out further, we actually will get into broader areas like Rockingham and down towards Mandurah as well. Somebody asked me about Mandurah later. I'll talk about Mandurah in a bit as well. So you can see that that's there. We might do another one. Where else we'll go? Why don't we go... let's go Victoria just to give you a comparison. So we're going to Victoria 3000. Remember what I said about Victoria 3000 being on the list? Well, from a mortgage stress perspective, it's not too bad. If I was mapping rental stress or if I was mapping investor stress, it would be a different, but I tend to map mortgage stress here. So you can see as we pull out that once again we have the same problem where there are areas to the west and east and north of Melbourne that are actually quite significantly stressed. You can see the areas around here beyond Greater Dandenong. You can see the areas over towards Wyndham as well as north, 3064 being one particular problem child. And if you pull out further and go out into regional areas, you can see that Ballarat is also there. So you can begin to see the hotspots. Now, this is interesting and important to understand that these areas with high stress correlate to higher home price falls as well. And I'll show you that in some of the more detailed data. The fact of the matter is that there is a strong correlation between mortgage stress and what happens to home prices. Where there are a lot of people under pressure, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to sell. Okay, so interesting question from this one. Shall I come up? The dashboards look nice, but the devil's in the detail. How is the data collected? Well, you haven't obviously listened to what I said. We survey households. We survey households on a continuous basis. We ask questions about money in, money out. What are they spending? And we get information about their mortgage, how much of their income's going on their mortgage, how much is going out on other things. So we've got a little mini cash flow for each household. And that allows us then to be able to model this down to a specific segment within a postcode, look at cash flow. And that then gives us the baseline data, and we can aggregate it up to a postcode level or indeed a segment level or some other combination. So it's 52,000 households, a 0.5% sample. It's 1,000 new readings a week, and the last data point is just over a week old. So it's very, very current. So that's how we do it. Okay, James asked the question. Very good question, James. What does Chris Bates make of the situation? I'll get him back on in a few weeks, hopefully. I think it'll be quite interesting to see what he would say. Anyway, having looked at the maps and having looked at the stress and those sorts of things, I would... Thank you, Drew. Yeah, I was just going to say the same. If you want to look at the granular information at a postcode level, I've got that information here. I'm happy to share some of it. I've seen a few people throwing postcodes at me. So in a moment, I'm going to actually get into some of those, and I'll show you some of the data that I'm seeing and how it works. Before I do that, though, I should just explain in more detail the way the scenarios work. So we use our scenarios as a way of exploring different futures and to consider the consequences. It's not a forecast, but it's to try and show you the sensitivity that we have. And that's going to be quite important. None of the scenarios may turn out to be right. Things change. But this is part of the framework, as I explained, our core market model. And the scenarios are running forward from today. And if you look then at the scenarios we have, we run three. So the first is best. So this now assumes rates stay at 3.35% and it falls next year and inflation eases ahead of RBA expectations and wages rise faster and there's no recession in Australia. So that's the very best we can possibly see at the moment. The base case is that rates rise to 3.65% over the next few months, which means that we've got mortgage rates somewhere between 6 and 7%. They stay high through 2023. Inflation stays above target until 2024, 2025. No recession in Australia. And the worst case is rates go even higher, above 4%, which will give mortgage rates of 7% plus. They would stay high into 2024 along with inflation, but wages growth then starts to stall. We get a local recession and rates get cut. So those are the three scenarios that we look at. And that's important because what I'll show you now is the impact of that I'll just show you firstly at a high level, and then I'll go into the detail on the specific postcode data. So this is looking at home price scenarios based on 1 February, based on all those scenarios. And the best case scenario for houses on average is small further falls, and then in 3 years' time, slightly below where they are today. This is a cumulative view. The base case would show falls of perhaps 20 to 25% over 3 years for houses. Worst case scenario, a fall of around 40 to 45% for houses across Australia on average. Some will be more, some will be less. Units, somewhat similar profile, best case scenario. For the base case scenario, a bit of a fall, about 20%, and for units, worst case, a fall closer to 40%. The reason it doesn't fall as fast and as far is because houses actually outgrew units over the COVID period for many areas and for many people. So that's why we've got what we've got. Okay, so with that in mind, I will just make the point that individual segments, I'm just looking at young growing families, will have their own growth profiles. So it shows you that even when you look at the trends, segment trends vary from state trends as well. So that's just an interesting observation. Now, this is an example of the data that we can produce. This happens to be from October, but while I'm talking about this, I'm going to set up my current data set, and that then allows us to explore it in more detail. Right, so if I press this button, okay, so now we've got live data. This is actually as at January 2023. The base census is from 2021. And I can look at the household count in the postcode. I can look at the proportion borrowing, renting and owning outright. I can look at the mortgage stress. I can look at the price scenarios. I can look at the property profiles. I can look at the investment yields and the income. And I can make an assessment based on average disposable monthly income and what proportion is going on both the borrowing and the renting, so the mortgage repayment and the rent. And that's basically what I have for every postcode in the place. So let's have a little look, and I'll go back up a little bit. So Robert said, can you do Rolleston 6111? Yeah, we'll give it a go. Now, I should explain that some small postcodes aren't necessarily always showing, because what we do is we weight it based on households. So if it's a very low count, it might not show, but 6111 is. So this is Rolleston, obviously in WA, in the wheat belt, and 9,700, I'm going to take the chat off so you can see it, 9,700 households with 29% owning outright, 50% borrowing, that's more than 4,600, 20% renting, and from a mortgage stress perspective, 42% or 1,981 borrowers in mortgage stress, 86% or 1,600 in rental stress, stressed investors 22%, the overall financial stress metric 43.7. And so the scenarios are the best case for houses, and most of them in the area are houses, 89% are houses in the area. Best case is a fall over the next 3 years of about 4%, so down 4.8, slightly bigger fall, and then a recovery to 4.2% cumulative over the next 3 years. That's the best case scenario. Base case is a fall of 10, 22 and 29, so prices continue to fall. The worst case, which is probably more extreme than we're going to see, is down 47%. So somewhere between 4 and 29% is probably where you're more likely to be. Now, in looking at the investment yield, on average, gross investment yield is about 4.2%, but net investment yields after costs of interest and all those things, just 0.6. So most investors aren't making much at all. And if you look at the taxable income, 76,000 for the individual ATO, the census, which is a household number, 80,000, and that translates to $4,774 per month on average. And it means that about 40.8% of disposable monthly income is going on the typical mortgage repayment, $1,950, and 30% is going on the average renter. So that's a pretty good example of why it is where it is. And Stripey corrects me on Cranbourne. Yes, unfortunately, there's a place in the UK with an M, and I keep getting it muddled up. So thanks for that. Okay, let's have a look. See another postcode. Okay. Step Up Consulting. If 2170 says Step Up Consulting, has so much stress, why are prices rising? I don't think they are rising. Check your latest data. Remember that the data in the portals are out of date by at least 60 days, probably longer. So they are not up to date. And that's one of the very important issues to remember. If I put in 2170 into the system, okay, the reason that I think prices are on the way down is it's a big area, 38,000, 20% are outright, 37% actually are borrowing, and 42% are renting. So there's a lot of renting, a lot of borrowing there. So a lot of investors as well, of course. 84% in mortgage stress, more than 12,000. 82% in renters in rental stress, and overall financial stress, 69%. So the scenarios we've got are falls of 11% or more over the next three years, maybe 16% over 3 years for the base case. And sorry, the base case even more. Units not quite as much. And the other point to make is 59% of houses, a lot of them, of course, newly constructed, small blocks, cheaply constructed, bought at the peak. Units 27%. And net investment yield negative for many people. That's worth just bearing in mind. And look at this, 48% of monthly disposable income going on the typical mortgage, $2,500. Renting, 36%. So that's one of the reasons why I read it differently. And I don't believe that domain data is current. All right. Happy Robot. What's that one? That's not a postcode. I don't know what that number is. Canberra. On there. 2601. Let's see whether I can do that one for you. Now, this is a low count, so I should just warn you that because it's a low count, that means that the statistical significance might be below what I'd like it to be. Nevertheless, you can get a rough view. We've got a lot of people renting in that particular area, some who are borrowing. Mortgage stress, 50%, quite low counts. And we're looking at 99% units, which is interesting. Again, low counts. So the unit statistics would say small falls, best case, maybe 4.8% down over 3 years. Base case down 26, worst case down 42. The gross investment yields at 5.1 are not too bad. And in fact, the net investment yields at 2.6 are pretty good, better than the ones we looked at before. Canberra investment properties tend to do a bit better. At least they have up till now, although we are seeing that the net investment yields are falling now because of the cost of the mortgage repayments. And 29% going on the borrowing, 34% disposable income going on the rent. So that's where we are with that one. And just a quick shout out to Michael for the super chat. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, Aussie Flyer Dave asked for 2307. So we'll put that one in, 2307. That's Shortland in the Hunter Valley. And then another low count, so this is only 1,978 households. And 36% are borrowing, 38% are renting, 87% in mortgage stress, 55% in rental stress, household financial stress at 57%. And the scenarios are, for houses, it's mostly houses, 69%. Best case is 13% over 3 years fall. Base case down 38% over 3 years, and the worst case down 56%. Again, worst case probably overstated, but clearly the chances of a rise pretty low at the minute. Looking at the investment yields, 3.1% gross, underwater net. And looking at the individual income or household income, typical disposable monthly income 4615, with 43.7% or 36.7% borrowing, and 40.7% for those renting, with around $2,000 and $1,879 going on the mortgage or the rent. Okay, let's just pick up this question and I'll come back here. Cookie Boy says, should the government go ahead with stage 3 tax cuts? No, they shouldn't. It would be inflationary, firstly, but also they need to spend money somewhere else in the system. Now, I know there's a political battle there to be run, but look, things economically are pretty shot at the moment. I think that it's probably a very bad policy, probably never been done. But the question is, will they want to turn around from what they gave as a commitment earlier on? Remember, the commitment was given so that there was no light between the two parties prior to the election. So it's bad policy. And interestingly, around the world, of course, the discussion is how can we increase taxes, not how can we decrease taxes. And I should make the point that we don't have enough funds going into the health service at the moment, the health system. There's a lot of other things. The support for those trying to get back into work is way too low because inflation's running very hot as well. So there are things that should be done ahead of the tax cuts, in my view. Okay, let's go to Bacchus Marsh in Victoria. That's postcode 3340. 3340. All right, let's put that one up. So here we have a postcode with 9,600 households, 25% own outright, 53% are borrowing, and 21% are renting. Mortgage stress at 57%, or nearly 3,000 households. 1,500 renters in rental stress, a little bit of investor stress, 48% in financial stress overall. And looking at the scenarios, we're looking at falls of 10% over 3 years, best case scenario, base case down 35%, worst case down 53%. I'm going to focus on houses because that's where the bulk of the property is. Gross investment yields 3%, and the disposable monthly income around $6,100, with 34% going on the borrowing and 27% going on the renting. So again, what I see consistently is this disposable monthly income chewing up a significant proportion. Very significant issue. Okay, Michael says, tell us what's happening with postcode 4130. Sure, we'll give it a go. And I would remind you that if you want to get hold of all this data, it's available from my Patreon subscription. I will be sending this out to the subscribers over the next day or two, and that provides the same data view. I've actually enhanced the data view I send now, so this same data view will go to anybody who subscribes on the Patreon for the monthly data set. It's a specific tier within Patreon. I'll show you that in more detail a bit later. Okay, 4130 for Michael. Only 3,000 households there, 29% own outright, 57% of borrowing, 13% of renting, 88% in mortgage stress, 50% in rental stress, 21% in stressed investing, 68% overall, and we see a best case scenario of down 3% over 3 years, the base case down 28%, the worst case down 47%. And again, I'll focus on houses because they're mostly houses. Gross investment yields 4.4, net investment yield 1.7. We tend to see slightly better net investment yields in Queensland, although those yields are being crushed by higher interest rates. The average taxable income is a little higher than some other areas, so we get $7,000 or thereabouts. Typical borrowing, taking 35% of disposable monthly income, 2,522, and 29% of renting for paying the rent. So there you go. Okay, can I bring up 3156? I'll give it a go. 3156. Sometimes it will bleep at me because it doesn't have the data, but this one's all right. As I explained, some postcodes with small counts aren't necessarily represented every month. Okay, so this one is 14,600 households in the postcode. That's based off the census. 31% are owning outright. 49%, well, actually 50% are borrowing. 18% are renting. And 33% are in mortgage stress, rental stress, not a problem. And we do have some stressed investors. So we think that there could be, over 3 years, the best case, just a very slight increase over 3 years, 0.5% cumulative. So it goes down, down, and then up a bit. The base case is down 23%. The worst case is down 42.3%. Mostly houses, of course, so I'll just stick on houses again. The gross investment yield is 3.8. Net investment yield is negative, so quite a few people here are losing money from an investment perspective. So you perhaps expect more stressed investors ahead. And from a taxable income perspective, the gross disposable is 5,333, 45% going on the typical borrowing, more than $2,400, and 36.4% going on the typical rent at $1,944. Okay. West Footscray says Glenn. 3021. 3012, sorry, got back to front. Okay, so this is 3012 West Footscray, 11,000 households, 18.7% are owning outright, 39% are borrowing, and 41% are renting, and 40% are in mortgage stress at 1,700. The renting stress is 76%, on 3,500. Financial scenarios 55%, and fall of 10% over 3 years. Best case for houses, mostly houses. There's a few units there, so that's slightly lower, of course. The base case is a fall of 35%, and the worst case a fall of 54%. The gross investment yield is 3.2. Net investment yield is just positive, very slightly. Most investors not making much. And looking at the disposable monthly income, 39.9%, or 2,500 going on typical mortgage, and 29% at 1,843 going on the typical rent. Cookie said, I heard Brisbane's on the rebound. Any data to show? Nope. No. Cookie, I'm not sure whether you got that from. CoreLogic said that the prices in Brisbane were falling faster than Sydney last time. So I don't see any evidence of any rebound in Brisbane. In fact, particularly units are doing quite badly. In fact, if I could put up the 4,000, let's put up 4,000 as the centre of Brisbane. And you can see there that 9,299, 14% own outright, 18% are borrowing, and most people are renting. 31% in mortgage stress, 69% of renters in rental stress, 63% of stressed investors. Overall financial stress very high, and so you can see there that even the best case scenario for units is a fall. Houses too. Most of them are units, of course, in the area. So there's a lot of high rise there, more being built. Gross investment yield is around 5.2, net investment yield 2.2, better than some areas. But look at this, 33% on the typical mortgage, 2,239, and 33.8%, 2,243 for the typical renter. Interesting comment there from Cross Stitch Ange. Thanks for that comment. All these rate rises, I still see plenty spending big on holidays and big TVs. Will the government bail them out in a few months' time? I feel like squeaky wheel gets the oil. Mortgage holders are not vocal enough. Yeah, so it's very interesting. I had a conversation today with somebody who said, well, surely the government's going to bail people out. Well, except, of course, they've got a problem because they've got inflation, so they can't put too much more liquidity into the markets directly. And you've also got the situation where there are so many demands on the budget, and Chalmers is trying to keep the budget under control. The other point to make is that whilst there are people with difficulty, there are a lot of people refinancing. A lot of those people who are refinancing are pulling equity out of their property through Equity Mate. It's one of the things that I think people have not fully understood. There's about $90 billion last year pulled out of Equity Mate. That's allowing people to have a lifestyle beyond what they actually can really afford. And of course, the other point to make is there's a 3 or 4 month lag between rising rates that the RBA says and hitting household budgets. So quite a few people are actually not prepared for the rate rises that are coming. So that, I think, explains it. But I did make the point earlier on that the retail numbers are dropping, and certainly the retail numbers over Christmas were down a bit, and now the 3 month one too. So I suspect we are going to see significant reductions ahead. Okay, let's just have a quick look. Robert Barwick says, sorry to interrupt, but you should know that the motion for a Senate inquiry into regional banking closures is live. Will be voted on Thursday. People who should support should call their senators. Robbie, that's terrific news. Great to know. And very, very, very good news that, in fact, we're going to have a discussion. There were some really good speeches made the other day in Parliament from people who really were highlighting the issues with regard to regional banking. And it's great to know that we are now going to get a vote on Thursday. So, folks, refer to my earlier conversation with Robbie and the other shows where I talked about regional banking and the closure of branches. Pick up those phones, make sure that the senators know that this is a really important issue, and give them hell, because the more we actually get them to understand just how significant this is, and just to remember that we've had significant branch closures, not just a few, massive branch closures, and so many people in regional areas are now branch less and having to drive a hell of a long way. So thanks for that, Robbie. Really appreciate your coming on and giving us that little bit of information. Okay, yep, I agree. It's a real issue, and I must say that some of the pressure that I see amongst older cohorts is really quite concerning. Okay, now this is one from, here we got, try Gugong 2620. 2620, one of the most profitable. 2620, let's see. 2620. Okay, so this is in and around the ACT, of course. Eden Monero. And yeah, you're right, the incomes are quite high. Let's have a look. 17,000 households, let's put that up. 17,000 households. 22% are outright, 46% are borrowing, 31% are renting, 75% in mortgage stress, no rental stress to speak of, some stressed investors, overall financial stress at 45%. So the best case, and look at 67% houses, down 4.7% over 3 years, base case down 29%, worst case down 47%. And the rental returns 3.5% or 0.6% net investment yields. And looking at the household census income, 113,000, translates to a disposable monthly income around 6,997, with 37.2% going on those mortgages, $2,600, and 24.2% going on the typical rent. So, well, it might be an affluent area, but I would suggest to you that there are some signs there of some difficulty in some areas too. Thanks, Kerry, for your comment there. Much appreciate the work and those thoughts in these times. Well, I'm just trying to help and inform people so that they can make better decisions. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to say that there's no hope, etc. What I am trying to say is it's important to understand what's really going on. And frankly, the mainstream media has done a really, really, really bad job of dealing with these issues. Now, Karl Marx asked, do you have a model of what would happen if the government was to scrap negative gearing? Yeah, it's worth about 30 billion currently in terms of overall tax relief. So there's three things that would happen. The government probably wouldn't get re-elected, so they probably won't do it. Secondly, what it would do, it would actually put significant pressure on the rental sector and investors unless they could grandfather the arrangement. So in other words, don't allow new people to leverage negatively, or indeed just allow a person to have one leverage property but not multiple leverage properties. It depends a little bit on how they do it. The net impact would be a bit of a fall in terms of property values, but unfortunately it would also lead to a further reduction in investment properties, and that means that rents will go up. So it's not necessarily a very powerful lever to pull just at this time, and of course it's politically very unacceptable. Mind you, I still think it should go. It's absolutely distorted the market for years. Drew says 3223. So that's St Leonard's in Victoria. Okay, let's get rid of that. Okay, so we have 4,300 households with 52% owning outright. That's one of the highest, most stable. 52.7% own outright, 25% borrowing, 21% renting. So you would expect that to be relatively stable. 28% of borrowers in mortgage stress, 78% of renters in rental stress, so they have a problem. Stressed investors a bit, but not too much, and only 29% of households in financial stress. So overall, best case scenario, and it's mostly houses, 92%. 8.4% over 3 years, fall. Base case down 33, worst case down 51. And it's also worth saying that the gross investment yield is at 3.3, net investment yield minus 0.2. And look at this, monthly disposable income is pretty low in this particular postcode, 3,949, with a couple of $1,000 going on the typical mortgage at 50%, and average renter 42.9%, 1,694. And this is, of course, in Geelong. And Geelong is an area where there's been quite a lot of mortgage pressure for some time, unfortunately. So that's the story there. I think the real issue is that it's the disposable monthly income problem, because overall cash flow is under pressure because of the cost of living. And Cookie Boy said to Robert Barwick, "Hello, Chairman." Very good. Okay, let's have a look here. What's this one? 3156. 3156. Did I do 3156? Don't think so. Let's have a look. 3156. Ferntree Gully in Melbourne. Okay. Yeah. Not that rich, really. 14,600 households, 31% owning outright, 49% are borrowing, and 18.7% are renting. 33% in mortgage stress. There's not much rental stress. Bit of investor stress. And the best case is a rise of 0.5% over 3 years. The base case down 23%. It's mostly houses again. Worst case down 42%. The gross investment yield is 3.8. Net investment yield minus 0.7. And looking at the taxable income, typical disposable monthly income 5,333 with 45% borrowing. That's 2,400. And 36.4% of disposable monthly income going on the rent. So I would say we have a few issues. And Marcus says 4350. 4350. Okay, so this is Harriston and, of course, Toowoomba. It's interesting because in the ATO postcode series, they attribute 4350 to Harriston, but actually it's really Toowoomba. So really this is one of my top picks in terms of mortgage stress. So in this postcode, 47,000 households, 28% own outright, 32% are borrowing, more than 15,000, and 38% are renting at 18,000. We have 71% in mortgage stress. We have 61.8% in rental stress. We have 23% in stressed investors and 51.9% overall. Scenarios are, best case scenario, down 3% over 3 years. Base case scenario for houses, and it's mostly houses, 76.7%, down 27%. Worst case, down 46%. Looking at the investment yield, 4.1%. Net investment yield, 0.5%. The average taxable income, 74,000, pretty much aligned with the household census, which gives us a disposable monthly income around $5,000. And a typical proportion going on the mortgage, 35%, $1,800, or 29.9% at 1,520. Looking at the rents. Whoops. Okay, let's have a look. I picked the wrong one. Sorry, I misread it, did I? 3233. Sorry, I'll do the right one. 3233. Apollo Bay, Geelong. Is that the one? Let's try and read that. The problem is that it goes away. 3233. When I click on it, which is what I do to actually display it, 3233. Yeah, it goes away from my list. So I need to change my programming. So once I click on it, it's hard to read. Oh dear, technology, don't you love it? Now, I should say, this is a low count, just over 1,000. So you've got to take this with a bit of a sort of a straw, right? 25% borrowing, 25% renting, the rest owning outright. There isn't any mortgage or rental stress. So the scenarios are a rise of about 5%, best case. Base case down 19, worst case down 37, mostly houses. 3.3% gross investment yield, net investment yield 0.2, and the disposable monthly income is quite low. Now that could well be, of course, because a lot of those are part-time properties, and so therefore it might distort it. 52.9% going on the typical mortgage, $2,000, or 38.7% going on the typical rent, $1,495. Okay. $4,012. So this is Wayville Heights in Brisbane and Moreton Bay. 10,500 households here, with 17.8% owning outright, 37% borrowing, 45% renting, 21% stressed, 58% in rental stress, households in financial stress at 48. We have a rise of 0.8% over 3 years. Best case scenario. Base case is a fall of 23. Worst case, a fall of 42. And we have 48% houses, 40% units. So look at the units. Again, a small rise, best case. A fall of 20. A fall of 36. And the gross investment yield is 40.8 or 1.3 net investment yields. And looking at the disposable monthly income, 6,439, with 38% or 2,449 for the typical mortgage and 29.8% or 1,918 for the typical rent. Okay, what else have we got? Bankstown 2200. Yep. Here we go. So 15,000 households, 22% owning outright, 30% borrowing, 46% renting, 29% in mortgage stress, 72% in rental stress, 41.1% stressed investors, and households in financial stress 54.7%. The price scenarios are fall of 11% over 3 years for houses, 38% of houses, 9.8% fall for units, 44% of units. And then we've got a fall of 36 versus 30 and 54 versus 47. So falls from wall to wall. Gross investment yield 3.4, and the typical disposable monthly income 4,740, with 50% going on the typical mortgage and 43% going on the typical rent. Whoops. Okay, let's go here. Thank you for a joy. 6027. All right, so 6027, 6,000 households, sorry, 16,000 households, 29% own outright, 48% of borrowing, 28% of renting, 31.8% in mortgage stress, 84% in rental stress, 25.4% stressed investors, and 42.1% household in financial stress. And we see small falls, best case scenario, 85% of houses, so down 2.9% over 3 years. Best case, base case down 27%, worst case down 46%. Gross investment yields 4.2, and the typical average taxable income translates to a disposable monthly income around $6,000 with 39.5% or $2,400 a month for those borrowing, and rent 31.2 or 1894 per month. James says, we need another Rennick interview. Yep, well, that's a very interesting question. So let me know if you'd like me to get Rennick back on. I think it probably would be Rennick not with John Adams, because I'd like to hear more about his ideas for some of the strategies he's got. And I certainly would be keen if you would be keen. So put some comments below and let me know. I'm always happy to try and oblige. And Jason said, a Rennick Keen Adams live stream would be awesome. It would be chaotic. I don't know how I'd be able to police that. The mind boggles just quietly. Okay, Cross Stitch Anne says Bannock Burn 3331. 3331, yeah, okay, let me try and do that for you. 3331. All right, here we go. Just going to get rid of the chat so you can see it. It's a small postcode, 2432, with 26% owning outright, 62% of borrowing, so it's a very high borrowing count, 10.8% renting, with 40% in mortgage stress, 100% in rental stress. It's a small count, perhaps. And overall financial stress, 38%. So there's a small fall, 11% best case scenario for houses. Mostly houses, 96%. Base case down 36, and the worst case down 53 over 3 years. Net investment yield, 3.1. Gross investment yield, minus 0.2. And disposable monthly income, 6515, with 34% going on the average mortgage repayment and 29.8% going on the average rent at 1944. Okay, and here's another question. We've got 2200, 2200. I'm not sure what 2200 is. 2200. Bankstown. We did Bankstown, didn't we? I think we did. I think I did that one. Anyway, it's there if you want to read it. Ham said, I see. Hang on. Let's do that. And then that. 4570. Let me try that one. 4570. Okay. So this is Motha Mountain with 18,000 households, 39.1% owning outright, 38% borrowing, 22.1% are renting, and we've got 30% in mortgage stress and 83% in rental stress. There's a scenario that says for houses, 92% for houses, a small rise over 3 years. The base case is a fall of 24%, and the worst case is a fall of 42%. The investment returns are 4.6% gross, 0.9% net, and the disposable monthly income. Now, some of this again could be maybe second homes and things, but nevertheless, this is what the numbers say: 42% going on the typical mortgage and 39% going on the typical rental payment. Okay, Mandra 6210. Somebody was asking about that earlier on. 6210. It's actually eased back a little bit. So we have 31,000 households in Mandra, and we have 32% owning outright, 38% borrowing, so a lot of people still there, 28% renting, 24% in mortgage stress, 3491, 64% in rental stress, and 23% stressed investors. Overall financial stress now 35.6. So it's interesting how that's come down in the last few months. These scenarios are a small rise, best case for houses, 81% of houses, 0.2. Base case down 24, worst case down 42. And the investment returns around 4.2%, net investment yields 0.7. I will highlight, the census said there were 17% vacant properties in Mandra, more than 6,000. So that could be another factor to bear in mind with these statistics. And the disposable monthly income is around $4,000, with 50% going on a typical mortgage and 37% going on the typical rent. Okay, interesting question here. Thank you for that. How concerned do you think the banks are if prices were to drop by even your base case scenario? Very good question. I still don't believe that the bank's modelling is taking sufficient account of what I'm seeing, because they still have tended to hold on to the view that interest rates are not going to rise much and that people are fine, etc., etc. Of course, the RBA has said in the quite recent, they have plenty of buffers, and some do, of course. So the banks are moving the goalposts, so they're stretching loan terms and they're encouraging people to try and sell if they're in difficulty. And remember that quite a few people saw significant run-ups in property values. So if they had a mortgage 4 or 5 years ago, they saw a massive run-up and now it's coming back and there's still equity. So it won't necessarily directly impact the banks immediately, but I've done some sensitivity work with some of them in terms of showing the potential impact if in fact rates go on rising. If my mid-case scenario is more true, and there is a crossover point where things start to get quite difficult, you have to think about financial stability and the impacts of that. That's something which I think the RBA and APRA will be thinking about. I wouldn't be surprised to see a reduction in the buffer rate, the APRA 3%. Maybe they'll say, well, we'll move it to a 7% and just leave it at that, or something like that, which might give it more leeway. We're also seeing some of the underwriting standards loosening to allow people to still borrow, because the banks are still keen. And of course, they're pushing through refinancing like you wouldn't believe. You can get $3,000 to $5,000 to refinance, and you can probably save some money on the way through. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, Eubank. So there's a lot of moving parts here. I personally think the bank's sensitivity models are not appropriately sensitized to the scenarios that I think are most likely. But they are different scenarios and nothing like mine, I'm afraid, because I don't just look at the mortgage. I look at the total household footprint, including income and expenditure. You also asked about 3030. Let me put that in. Okay. And 3030 is Derrimont in Melbourne. That's Point Cook Werribee, of course. One of my most studied postcodes. 41,000 households, 17% own outright, 49% are borrowing. There are a lot of first-generation Australians here too. A lot of people renting as well. 33% in mortgage stress, more than 6,000. 50% in rental stress. And stressed investors, 13.6%. Overall households in financial stress, 37.3%. Scenarios are mostly houses, 86%. Down 4.9% over 3 years is the most likely scenario. A bit of a drop and then a recovery. You can see here this from the chart, right? And looking at the gross investment yield, 3.1, net investment yield on average minus 0.2, disposable monthly income 6,750, with 35.6% or 2,400 going on the typical mortgage and 27.4% going on the typical rent. So there's a few interesting pressure points that I see here. Okay, what's this one here? 2200. 2200 is Bankstone. Okay, so I thought I did that one. I'll do it again. Okay, so this is 2200. I thought I'd done this one, but maybe I didn't. I get out postcoded in due course. 15,000 households, 22%, 30% and 46% for owning, borrowing and renting, 29% in mortgage stress, 72% in rental stress. And you can see here that the 38% of houses, 11% over 3 year best case, that's a fall, 36% fall for the base case. For units, down 9.8 and 30. And looking at this, 50%, 2368 for the rent, for the mortgage, I should say, 43.1%, $2,000 for typical rent. Okay, let's see what else we've got. What are your top 10 items to own for the coming apocalypse? Very interesting question. So, look, my view is it's very good to be able to grow your own food. I've been doing a bit of that, and we'll do a lot more of that ahead. I've tended to assume that some of the things that we take for granted as being available may not be. I also wonder about the sustainability of power and those sorts of things. So there's some base items, in terms of just basic survivability. From a point of view of investing, I still think stock markets have further to fall. I'll make a post about that over the next few days. There's been a couple of recent discussions that really said, look, you've not taken into account the falls that we're seeing in terms of earnings. Earnings are dropping and will drop quite a lot more. So the markets have yet failed to take account of that. So I'd be a bit careful in holding a lot in the markets at the moment. I've tended to pull stuff out. I'm sort of basically trying to sort of stand on the sidelines and just wait for this thing to go pop and then work out what to do then. I don't hold gold though. I'm not a believer in gold. Whilst there's an argument to say, well, it may not lose value, it doesn't really gain value, and you can't eat gold. So I don't tend to believe that that's a great opportunity at the moment either. So that's some of the things I'm thinking about. Okay, Robbie says, thank you. Yeah, glad to help. Glad to help. And Mediocre says, toilet paper. Yeah, good idea. We've seen it before. Okay. Now, let's have a look. What is this one back up here? Sorry. Hang on. Here. Tony Lacantro says, amazing how you run these events now. I'd like my daughter to eventually buy in 6080. Could you check the odds, please? Have I got that right? 6060. 6060. I should explain that the screen's a bit of a way away. 6060. Hello, Tony. We need to get you back on, Tony, for one of your shows again. I'll send you a message. Okay. Tony Lacantro, this is for you. 6060. 12,000 households, 21.8% owning outright, 34.6% of borrowing, 43.6% of renting, 63% in mortgage stress, more than 2,600, 64.4% in rental stress, investor stress at 19.8%, and overall financial stress 54%. Scenarios are, and look, it's 37% houses, 15% units. There's quite a lot of other types of property there too, but I'll go with houses and units. So scenario is down 3.6% over 3 years, best case, down 28%, base case, worse, 46%. And units 3, 24, 40 all falls. The gross net investment yield down 3.9, net investment yield down 0.3. And looking at the disposable monthly income, typical monthly income 5,657, 39.1% for the mortgage, $2,200, or 28.5% going on the rent. And I should add this disposable monthly income calculation for the amount is actually sensitized to where rates are currently. So it's actually real data from real households. So there you are, Tony. Thanks for that. I hope that helped. And thanks for the super chat, of course, greatly appreciated. Let's go back down here and see what else we've got. T-Rex said, whoops, missed. It's a bit like trying to shoot apples in a barrel. 7,000, please. Hobart. 7,000, here we come. So I'm going to stop giving postcodes in a second because I just want to finish off the rest of the show. And I will tell you how you can still get information about a particular postcode afterwards if you'd like to do that. So hang around and I'll tell you about that in a second. Okay, this is postcode 7,000, North Hobart. 6,464 households, 28% owning outright, 28% of borrowing, 43% of renting, 60% in mortgage stress. We've seen significant rises in Hobart recently. 47% in rental stress, and 24% stressed investors. Overall financial stress, 44%. The scenarios are down 1.6% over 3 years. Best case for houses at 61%. 26% of units down 1.4%. Cumulatively, base case down 22%. And disposable monthly income, 34.8% or 2222 for the mortgage, 31.2%, 1993 for the typical rent. Okay. It was 2120. Did I get the wrong one? Quite possibly I did. 2120. What's that one? Pennant Hills. There we are. I'll do Pennant Hills just because I may have misread it previously. Pennant Hills, 7,500. 33% owning outright, 45% borrowing, 20% renting, 38% mortgage stress, 85% rental stress, 26.7% in investor land, financial stress 48%. So the scenario is 79% houses, down 12% over 3 years, best case scenario, base case down 37, worst case down 56, investment return 3.4 and break even for net investment yield, gross monthly income down 42.5% or 3,380, and for the typical rental payment 32.5% or 2,591. So there you go. What about Edwin's baby? 2148. Okay, 2148. Blacktown, yay! Okay, we'll finish on Blacktown. That's a good one to finish on. So 23,000. 23,000, 21% owning outright, 37% at borrowing, 41% renting, 53% in mortgage stress, 78% in rental stress, bit of investor stress too, 60% in financial stress. So, best case scenario for houses, 71% of houses, down 14% over 3 years, base case down 39, worst case down 58, and net investment yield is break even. Monthly disposable is about 6,000, 42.8% going on the mortgage and 33.2% going on the typical rent. So there you are. Okay, so I'm pretty much out of time, and of course I've always got more postcodes than I can deal with, but I will just make a couple of closing remarks. The first one is, I think it's very important to remember that there are areas where you can get help. So if you are in financial pressure, financial stress, sure, you can go talk to the bank, and I do recommend you do that, but you want to get some objective independent advice. So I recommend the National Debt Helpline on 1-800-007-007. That's a government service. And the reason I mention this is because you can Google and get a lot of so-called help when it's not, because they'll charge you an arm and a leg and they don't give you objective independent advice. The National Debt Helpline is brilliant. They are very busy, of course. So make a note of that if you're in difficulty. And the other point I'd make, of course, is that many households actually don't end up understanding where they are from a financial flow perspective. So build a cash flow, prioritize your spending, and think ahead. If you know that there's going to be a rate rise, we know we've got fixed rates coming through in the next few months, worth doing that. Also, I'd make the point that a lot of people aren't necessarily on the best mortgage rate they could possibly get. So check out the portals, because if you go to CanStar or Mozo or one of the others, you can see where the best mortgage rates are. And actually refinancing is relatively easy to do unless you've got a very bad loan to value ratio or a very bad income profile or bad credit score. So many people can actually alleviate some of the pressures simply by moving to a better mortgage now. So it's worth doing that. And if you've got a fixed mortgage, sometimes the break costs are lower than the savings you can make. So it's worth looking at that. And then the final point to make is, this is a long-term grind. This is not going to suddenly get fixed. Even if interest rates were starting to drop because the RBA started to drop rates in a few months' time, that's not going to change the fundamental issue. Inflation is going to stay high for quite a long period of time. The RBA said till 2025. We know that the cost of living are rising. We know that many households are struggling with many multifaceted problems. So it is important to try and take account of that now, rather than put your head in the sand and say, oh, she'll be right. Very Australian, I know, but unfortunately, real incomes probably won't grow in real terms for many people for at least another year or two. So it is worth just bearing that in mind. And I will just make the point that if you want more information, or indeed if you would like to ask about a specific postcode, you can go across to my blog. It's digitalfinanceanalytics.com/blog. The link is in the comments below. And there's a little message facility down the bottom right-hand side of the blog where you can send me a message. And if you want to ask for a specific postcode, send me a message and I'll turn that around in the next few days. I don't do long lists, but if you have a specific postcode, I'm happy to do that for you. The truth of the matter is I always get lots and lots of requests, so it takes a few days sometimes to answer, so don't panic if I don't answer immediately. I'd also make the point that you can actually get, via Patreon, the data set that I'm actually using tonight. It's a very large data set. It's available by Excel, and it's got the same front end as I've shown you tonight. And in fact, if you want it, it's available at $50 per month plus GST. And you can join from the Patreon site. Again, the links are in the comments below. And some people subscribe just for a month to get one data set, but quite often people then subscribe and keep subscribing and get updated every month. I send it out to everybody in this tier every month. And it gives you a very, very good tool, and you can make your own comparisons and play around with the data to your heart's content. Because obviously I can't cover the whole of the scenario set every time for every postcode. And by the way, if you'd like to make a contribution to what we do here, we also run PayPal. Details there. It is greatly appreciated. We do have people who actually make some donations to what we do. Again, it's just trying to help us cover some of the costs of what we do here. I don't set out to make a profit. I'm just trying to cover the cost of what I do. And I also take Bitcoin with Bitcoin where it is. If you want some Bitcoin that you don't need, have Bitcoin you don't need, you can send it across. There's a QR code there. And there's some Merc as well. Now, next week, I have Leith von Onselen coming on to talk about economics. Remember, the Leith was the guy who said, the RBA won't raise rates very much at all. And basically he said, we're going to see he's back. I'll be very interested to see what he thinks now. And we can ask him some broader questions about some of the other economic issues. So mark your diaries for that. I think it'll be a very interesting conversation. And the following week, I've got Megan Wells coming on to talk specifically about Brisbane property, because as I think Cookie Boy suggested earlier on, there's a discussion about whether prices are moving up or down or what they're doing. So we can get literally from someone who's on the ground in Brisbane, the latest on Brisbane property in 2 weeks' time. And we'll go on from there. So I have come to the end of the show. Thank you very much for all the comments. I probably missed quite a few, and I apologise. I know I haven't got all the postcodes. Thanks for Stripey Cat. Great show as always, Martin. Thanks, I appreciate that. It's really appreciated. Thank you, and hope you found it useful. I'm trying to just give people a base of information so that they make better decisions. Like I said, I'm not making predictions about the future. My scenarios are just indicators. I'm sure the real world scenarios will end up differently. But I have to say that based on what I've seen today, my expectation is we will see more rate rises from the RBA. Now, I did ask in the poll what people thought, and I've actually got the answers here. So I asked the question, when will the RBA next lift rates again? And of those who actually, more than 400, put an answer up, 79% said March, 10% said April and May, 6% said June onwards, and 5% said they won't lift further from where they are. So the consensus is we're going to get more rate rises, and the question, of course, is how many and when. And it'll be interesting to see what the newspaper reports over the next 2 or 3 days. I'll cover those in some of the other shows. So, I think that's it. Thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight. Hope you found that useful. I will just bring the doggies back on. They've been there, sound asleep. In fact, Meteor's giving me a bit of a lick, as they do from time to time. The Meteor. So there you go. There's the doggies. And thank you for spending some time with us tonight. I hope you found that useful. Don't panic about the financial conditions here, but just try and prepare and be cautious and careful. And don't get too caught up in some of the spruiking that's out there. We'll do more anti-spruiks with Cookie Boy's help, and we'll do some more shows ahead with more information. And as I say, if you'd like to get a specific postcode, then you can contact me by the DFA blog, send me a message, and I'll send it back to you. Thank you very much for watching tonight. Take care. Keep safe. We'll see you next time. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. Cheerio.